Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Today's video is part of a blog hop for Waffle Flower's November release. So I'll have all that info in my blog post, links to all the other designers and inspiration and all that fun stuff. I am concentrating on some of the new die sets that Waffle Flower just released. Specifically the stems die set. It's fabulous. I die cut everything ahead of time from Ranger Heavystock, white Heavystock. So I've used this many times. I really like white Heavystock. It can handle a lot of water, anything like that. With what I'm doing, like with the watercoloring, you don't need Heavystock. I could have just die cut this from watercolor paper. I wasn't sure what I was going to do because you could use sprays, you could use inks, you could do whatever you want to color these, or you could just die cut them from color cardstock. But I ended up deciding to use my Altenew watercolor palette. Also because I'm still having trouble finding some of my things since I moved my office into the garage. And same with my Waffle Flower water media mat. Not quite sure where that is at the moment. I would be working on that instead of just on my work surface here. But regardless, all this I'm just going to clean up. I'm not too concerned about it. You could watercolor on top of scratch paper, you know, if this bothers you. But I'm embracing the mess. So I just die cut all these stems just a bunch of times. I have this whole pile here. I also there's a special delivery wafer die set that has some vases and a wrap piece. So you can create kind of a bouquet of flowers, you know, wrapped up, which is really cute. And then there's also the vase variety wafer die set that I used as well. I'll have links to everything like I always do. So all of that I die cut from the Heavystock and then painted. With ones like this, I especially like to die cut first before coloring, because with all of the florals and everything, this just gave me the option to, you know, paint the stems one color, paint the floral areas a different color, etc. But again, you could totally die cut these just from solid pieces of cardstock, or you could die cut them, spray them with distress spray stains or oxide sprays or whatever sprays you have. You could also smush inks, create ink smushed backgrounds, and then die cut them from these. The sky's the limit. As I was editing this, I was like, ooh, I could do this. I could do this. So I was just doing the watercoloring because that was just my mood for these. And it was also a mood that is not something I do very often, but I did more muted colors. I'm using this palette. Doesn't matter what palette you use, but I was adding, as I was kind of mixing up colors in the palette, I was adding bits of brown and bits of gray to things and just toning everything down, which is not normal for me. Usually, you know, I'm rainbow, bright, just crazy as can be. But I don't know. I was like, let's try something a little bit different. You know, nothing too crazy. So as I painted each piece, I would paint it and then set it aside. I have a big old cutting board that I would just set the pieces aside so that I don't, you know, stick my elbow in them or anything like that. And between each cluster of images I was painting, I was wiping up my work surface because it does get completely covered in blotches of watercolor, which not a big deal. So once I finished all the stems, I painted all of the vases that I had die cut. And same thing, not really a rhyme or reason to any of it. Just kind of mostly grabbing what was already in my palette, mixing things. I've created a little bit of mud with some of the colors, but I was okay with that because I was like, it's vases. That's, you know, it's not going to matter. So I was just having fun with it. If I was going to redo this, honestly, I would die cut these from specific watercolor paper, because while the Heavystock can totally handle the water in that, watercolor behaves differently on different surfaces, and it would have soaked in more and just been different on watercolor paper. Is it the end of the world? No, I'm just saying. So I did all my watercoloring of all the pieces. Once I'm done with all of these, I'm going to wipe down, clean up my work surface. Hand sanitizer works really good for stuff like that, just to really clean it all up and get it all out of there. So cleaned everything up. And then I pulled out the oversized Grace and Kindness stamp and die set. This came out, I'm not sure when, a while ago from Waffle Flower. I love, and I've said this in other videos, I love their oversized sentiment sets. Although any oversized sentiment set, or sentiment set in general. I'm a sucker for sentiments. I'm a sucker for florals, cutesy, all the things. But anyway, I pulled that out. And I die cut some of this, it's kind of like a shimmery gold paper from that pack, that a Tonic pack that I'll have linked to as well. And I die cut the word kindness from that multiple times because, as is tradition, I need to stack my sentiments. So I stacked 3 layers together of these die cuts. And this is sped up in editing. I've had people comment, they're like, I wish I could stack my sentiments, you know, as quickly and easily as you make it look. The magic of editing. But it is also practice. You know, after you've done this a bajillion times, it comes easy. And also, it depends on the glue you use. Like, I prefer using Simon's Craft Tacky glue. I'm using that with my bottle that has a metal tip that I've just screwed onto it. So I get a little bit of a more detailed application, and I use that with dyes like this that are a little finer and thinner. But whatever liquid glue you're comfortable with, this one gives me, you know, a little bit of wiggle room so that I can get my sentiments lined up. So whatever floats your boat and works good for you. So then the next thing I did was I pulled out the Waffle Flower brick wall stencil. And I did it wrong the first time, but I thought I would just keep this in here. I have my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine, the platform, the rubber embossing pad, and the purple embossing plate that comes with the machine, and the stencil. And I lightly misted my cardstock, ran it through, and completely wasn't paying enough attention. So to do this properly, I have the platform, the rubber mat, my cardstock, which goes on first, then the stencil. And because I'm using a thinner cardstock, I'm going to put the purple embossing plate, and then I'm going to use one of my metal shims. That gives it just enough. If you find that your sandwich stack isn't giving enough impression, same with like a very detailed wafer die, that sort of a thing, a metal shim comes in really handy. If you don't have one, even just an extra piece of cardstock will do the trick. Just don't force it through your machine. If your machine is like not taking it as you're turning the handle, don't force it. You could break your machine. So I imprinted that brick wall stencil onto the cardstock, so it's got that bit of texture to it, which I haven't done in the longest time. That's also why I messed it up the first time, because it's been a long time. But dry embossing stencils into cardstock, it's such a great way to get another use out of your stencils, and it creates great, like, more subtle backgrounds, which is exactly what I wanted, because even though my watercoloring was more subtle and not so bright, I still got a lot going on, and I'm going to pack these card fronts full. I could have done probably more cards with less florals, but like I always say, more is more. Why not? So all my watercoloring is obviously dry at this point, and I went through and just kind of separated everything between the two card fronts until I had all of my little, stems and whatnot. And then I attached the different florals and stems to the different vases on the back with just little bits of washi tape just to hold things down. And then I just glued them to this card front with Craft Tacky glue, and just kind of had a rough idea of what I was doing. Like, I've said this before too, I'm not good at like floral arrangements, like in real life. So when it comes to like arranging florals on cards, I sometimes definitely struggle with that. But with this, I was like, I'm just throwing it all on there. Why not? So adhered all of that to both of my card fronts, and then of course I'm going to add splatter. I pulled out my Avery L white spray. I've used this in a few videos lately. I'm really loving it. You just got to shake it up, and then I just pour a little bit onto, a non-porous surface, my little plastic palette thing here. And then I just pick it up with my fan brush and splatter away, and I'm good to go. So I did white splatter first onto both of these. And of course you can't see it in the videos and probably not in the photos either, but in real life you can actually see the white splatter on the brick embossed background. It's subtle, but it just gave it a little extra something. So I did the white splatter first, and then I pulled out my Gonzai Tombi Starry Colors. I'd already sprayed water in the one pan that I wanted to use, and then swirled that around really well with my fan brush, and then splattered some gold watercolor onto these as well, because, yeah, more is more, and I love splatter. Even though I've been saying lately, because I've been doing like tons of Christmas cards, you know, you can get away with it, but I'm still in Christmas mode, so it was a little hard to change directions and do completely non-Christmassy. Although with some of these greenies, you could totally do Christmas cards, really, now that I'm thinking about it, you know? And anyway, I did all my splatter, let all that splatter dry, and then I'm going to adhere the wafer die sentiments to these card fronts. And then off camera, I had heat embossed sentiments from the Coordinating Oversized Grace and Kindness stamp set. And adhering the dots to the eye separately. I have finally perfected this rather than sitting and fiddling and stacking it on. It's a million times easier to stack it right onto the card front. So that's what I did. And then the little companion sentiments that I heat embossed, I adhered to the card with little foam squares. So I'm going to do this to both card fronts. So adhere the die cut sentiment, adhere the dots for the eye till it's all stacked up, and then adhere the little companion sentiments. And then since I had, of course, extras of those stems, because when I started die cutting everything at the very beginning, I wasn't sure how many I need for the cards. So I was left over with extras, because even though I filled the card fronts, I still had some left over, which was perfect because it gave me something to add to the insides of the cards just for that little extra something. So I adhered some of the stamps to the inside of my cards, and my card bases are made from Simon's Ivory cardstock, and these are top folding A2 size cards. So I adhered the stems to the inside with some craft tacky glue, and then I pulled out a sentiment from the Thank You stamp set from Waffle Flower, and I inked that up with some VersaFine Claire Warm Breeze ink. It's kind of a turquoisey aqua color. So adhered those stems, and then tried not to overlap the stems too much on the inside because I don't like the insides of my cards to get bulky, you know. So adhered just 3 on each, and then once those are adhered, I flip over the card and trim off whatever's hanging off the edge of these stems, and then ink up that little stamp with that VersaFine Claire ink, and then stamp that onto the inside of the card. And then off camera, I had backed the card fronts with Simon's Big Mama foam tape. So it just gives it a little bit of dimension, but not too bulky. And then, of course, I'm going to add just a little bit of bling. Nothing too crazy. I have these teal ocean pearls from Studio Claudia. These were just meant to be. They go really well with that Warm Breeze ink. So I was like, ooh, it just kind of ties everything together. So sprinkled a few of those throughout these cards, and then I'll just adhere them into place with dabs of craft tacky glue. And then once these are all adhered, I'm going to pair these cards with some bronze envelopes, and that's going to finish them off. So like I had said earlier in the video, this is part of a blog hop and an Instagram hop. It's kind of the same on both. So all that info, like I said, it will be in my blog post, so you can check that out below if you're interested. I'll have a direct link to it. I'll also link to all the supplies I used, all that fun stuff, so you can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!